next speaker is a lady who has definitely done the hard yards, learning to communicate in a male-dominated industry. Denise Goldsworthy is going to share some of the things she's learned during her career in her talk on lessons on how to communicate with yourself as well as with others. So please join me in welcoming Denise to the stage.
Okay, first thing I'd like to do is also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Noongar people, and pay my respect to their elders, both past and present. One of the lessons that I have learned from my engagement with the traditional owners of our land is the importance of communication, which is what I'm talking about today. So hopefully I've got a few lessons for you that will be of some use. So firstly, a bit of a story about who I am. I am a wife and mother of two young adults that if I measure my success in life, it's around what I see is happening with my fantastic kids. I've got one who's now currently over in the US studying her master's with a partner who's doing postdoc research, very, very smart young kids out changing the world. I've got a son who, in between doing a triple major at UWA, is also on the Army Reserve, SES, and finds some time to work and occasionally play the guitar. So, overachievers. But some of the lessons that I think are most important to me, it became very clear to me when I was in high school about the importance of science and maths. And the further I have gone through my life, the more I have realised how important science and maths actually is to success, and the more frustrated I have become with the world, and a lot of people in particular in management who don't understand science and maths. To me, how the hell can you understand a profit and loss sheet if you can't understand the numbers that are on it? And how the hell can you change the profitability of a business if you don't understand the science? So a key piece to my success is actually being an exploring mind. And recently I've been recognised at a national level. I'm now a fellow of the Australian Academy of Technological Science and Engineering, which is about the 300 top minds in the country that are about promoting science and technology to improve Australia. I'm also the National Deputy Chair of the Resources Group for that. And that group has the responsibility of providing advice to the federal government around what should be happening with science-based policy to actually improve the success of the resources industry in Australia. So, it's a long way from high school, something I never expected to be doing, but that's the sort of thing you can get involved in. Very much a believer in people as well. I see everybody that I meet as an opportunity to learn from them. And it doesn't matter who they are, it doesn't matter how old they are. I'm one of these believers that every day you can learn something. And the only day that you don't learn something is the day that you die. And that's driven me very much. I'm now an entrepreneur. I now own my own company called Alternate Futures, which is a company about connecting solutions to problems or connecting Australia's researchers to industry. So living my passion back from when I was a teenager. Past executive, 17 years at BHP Steel, and if people say that being a female in mining was difficult, being a female in the steel industry in the 80s is another order of magnitude yet again. At one point in time, there were 10 of us on the steel side of the fence where there were 11,000 men. Right? Very interesting stat. 15 years at Rio Tinto, finished up as Managing Director of a couple of businesses at Rio Tinto, and I now also carry a portfolio of non-executive director stuff from Edith Cowan University. I have my own CSI team. I'm chairman of the board for Chem Centre WA, who do all of the forensic science for WA. Until recently, a non-exec director for Aquila Resources, and I'm also on the Navy Clearance Divers Trust, so very diverse thing. But how does that all come together in terms of what are the sorts of things that have been important to get me here? And there we go. And I think at the heart of success in terms of achieving this sort of stuff is around key communication. The first thing is about asking questions, and it's asking good questions, good open questions. You should be out there providing context about why you want to know, because that helps people become comfortable in providing you with the right answer. But explore, generate thinking time for yourself, try to seek understanding and find the opportunities to move forward. Now, one of the roles that I had with Rio Tinto was negotiating the final global commercial agreement for autonomous haul trucks that we have here in the Pilbara. Now, at the time I was brought in, Komatsu and Rio Tinto had been working together for 5 years and had a brilliant engineering solution. But in terms of actually working together, they were about to kill each other. They were knives at 10 paces, and but you said this and you said that, and I'm walking away and you owe me hundreds of millions of dollars, and argue. Now, one of the things that I expected to find was that because most of the Komatsu team were very conservative Japanese business individuals, and then most of the Rio Tinto team were Anglo-Saxons, that I expected there to be a Japanese-English barrier that had gone on. But part of what I found was that the communication from both sides had been atrocious over those 5 years. Basic questions, and I don't know how many of you know much about these trucks, but just imagine a big truck that's got a whole bunch of iPhone type stuff all plugged all over it that allows these trucks to work out where they're going. Now, just by knowing that much, to me, the first question was, well, an iPhone gets replaced about every 6 months. This truck, I want to last 15 or 20 years. How do you actually get the two to work together? How do you keep that truck but work out that the technology that's going to be created in 10 years' time is still going to work on this truck? Now, I found out when I went into those negotiations, nobody had actually asked that question before. Now, to me, that was sort of like an obvious question, but because everybody thought they knew what they needed to know when they went in negotiating. Nobody was asking questions. They didn't find these sorts of problems. Another question I asked them, dear truck company, when a mining company buys its trucks, do they replace them all on the same day? So if you've got a mine that's got 20 trucks in it, do they buy them all on the one day? And they said, of course not. Right? They spread the cash flow. They want to buy them out over a couple of years. So I then asked Komatsu, so how does this fit in with what I want to change over to an autonomous fleet? Oh, well, we will only fit it in the factory, and therefore you've got to buy them all on the one day. Okay, but think about it. Has any mining company ever done that? No. So can you do things differently? Can you work out how to fit this stuff in the dirt in the Pilbara? Their first answer was no. After 3 weeks of further questions, which went right back to their engineers, the answer finished up being yes. And now those autonomous trucks can be retrofitted with the iPhones and the other gizmos and things that are required. And not only do Komatsu do it, Caterpillar do it, Hitachi do it, everybody does it. It was actually quite an easy engineering fix if somebody asked the questions. Equally, listening is just important. If you don't, yes, you've got to ask the right questions, but if you don't understand the answers that you get, then you're not going to get very far. One of the other things that came out, there was a big fight over intellectual property. Now, these companies had actually had a written agreement that all the lawyers had put all of the I's dotted, T's crossed, pages and pages of definitions, all of these sorts of things. But I found when it came down to what we're actually doing on site, the two companies were fighting over this. And again, this was because people hadn't listened. Now, on a particularly bad day in the middle of Tokyo where they had the worst snowstorm in 25 years and everybody was snowed in, the negotiations I was working on totally broke down and we walked out on them. And I'm sitting in Rio Tinto's office in Tokyo going, why the hell has this happened? And the only thing that made sense was because both companies were using the same words, but we didn't actually understand what they meant. And this wasn't a Japanese-English problem. This was actually a mining jargon problem. And when I started to pull apart the problem, I worked out that the only reason the two companies were fighting was because they didn't actually know what the hell the two of them were talking about. So we spent the night getting our geologists put together a bunch of slides on what a resource model looks like, some mining engineers to talk about how a road in a mine actually links into making sure the walls don't fall down and all of this sort of stuff. And we went back to Komatsu the following day, a company that have been working in the mining industry for something like 40 or 50 years, and taught them Mining 101. And they went, my God, we didn't know this. A whole bunch of people that had supposedly been asking questions and listening and had found out that they didn't know what the hell they were talking about. And once we'd got that on the table, everything then flowed smoothly. Everybody knew what they knew. We were all open about it. We could all find solutions. So that also comes down to clarity. Right? You've got to be very careful with the words that you're using. The next bit that's been very, very important around communication is self-talk. Right? Lots of people focus on the communication that you have trying to influence others. But how much do you think about the time that you spend influencing yourself? The first thing about self-talk is about self-confidence, the whole fear of competition. Right? Women are terrible at this. They go, oh, I'm not going to do that because I might fail, I may not be good enough, I'm not going to apply for this job because I haven't got every skill. Lots of discussion about this. But there's some interesting research that's been done, and it's been around for a while, that says the less competent you are, the more you actually overestimate your ability. Well, what this actually means is that you need to know what you're talking about to know whether you don't know it. Does that make sense? So if you don't know what you don't know, then yeah, you can think you'd be really, really good. But once you actually do know what you don't know, then you start to get scared of it, right? And you can imagine that sort of conversation going on in somebody's head. Do I really know this? Maybe I don't, yeah, whatever, right? It gets all very confusing, right? But the first thing is we all have these conversations ourselves, right? You need to be proactive. And who is the person that has the most influence on whether you have the resilience to move forward, to take on a challenge that you've never done, to go in and have an experience that you've never had before? It's actually the words in your own head. You hear 100 times more words in your own head from yourself than you do from anybody else that you're talking to. It's actually the biggest source of influence. So you need to be prepared to coach yourself, to back yourself up with courage, resilience, flexibility, know what you know, creativity, judgment, reflection, learning, all of these sorts of things. And if you don't know what skills or experience are required, but you can see the gap, do something about it. Don't just go, oh, yeah, I haven't done this, I don't know whether I can do. Interesting story. I'm now a black belt in Taekwondo. I only have been for about 18 months. Took it up as a mother when my son took it up at the age of 6. He was being bullied at school and finished up going into martial arts. He's now 6 foot, built like concrete. You definitely wouldn't want to run into him in a dark alley. Actually competed at national level. But for me, Taekwondo was really, really hard work. Part of it was just the age when I took it up. Right? The body's developed the way that it has. I had arthritis at the time, not flexible, hadn't done lots of exercise. It's really, really hard work. And it would be really, really easy to say, no, I'm not going to do all this, and not take on the challenge and push myself. But I actually use Taekwondo as a way to remind myself that while I have been successful in lots of places in my life, right, that it is still hard work for me to be the best that I can be. Now, to overcome the physical fears, back when I was a green belt, so the colours go yellow, green, blue, red, black, and a whole bunch of other ranks in between, so relatively inexperienced. They were short of some adults for some people who were grading for their black belt. and part of the grading process is you've actually got to go in and fight each other. So these are people that you know quite well, that you've been training with a few times a week. And when the adrenaline's rushing, when people are grading, they can actually be quite violent. Now, I finished up having my nose broken by one of my close friends that I still train with. And he was very, very sorry afterwards. But what it then took to get in and to still get in, to be physically fighting with sort of 20-year-old, 80, 90 kilo males that are sort of 80 or 90 kilos of muscle that are significantly faster and all of these sorts of things. It takes a lot of stuff going on in his head to get back in there and do it. And I find it quite fascinating, the number of 80, 90-year-old teenage males at university who are terrified of me. They shouldn't be. But the reason they are is because I've got this conversation in my head under control and they don't. And that's all it is. They are actually physically faster, physically stronger than I am. It's all about what you actually tell yourself. You need to be proactive. You need to be positive, right? If you're not going to get to where you need to be. You need to change the conversation. Now, a couple of tips around how you can change the conversation. The first thing is, there are some things that you can't control. Accept that and get on with it, right? You can't necessarily change the world, but you can work out how to go around the barriers that are there. So if there's something else that's somebody else's fault, look, leave the blame there, don't take it on yourself. Think about life from a perspective of risk management. Right? If I do this as well as that, have I got a plan B? All of these sorts of things, it can help give you more confidence to move forward. Be prepared to recognise and reward your own failures. Right? A lot of people go, yeah, well, I tried that and it didn't work. Yeah, well, there's lots of things that you've got to not only try, but actually practice them hundreds or thousands of times before you're actually good at it. If you give up after one go, right, you're not going to get very far. You have to reward yourself in terms of, at least I tried, I learnt from it, I'm going to do something different next time, I'm going to prepare differently, I'm going to get a different bit of information, I'm going to do whatever else it is and try again. Which just sort of raises the whole question, and women can be terrible procrastinators. And while they don't call it procrastination, they're actually perfectionists. But in practice, it finishes up being the same thing. I'm not going to try this until I can know I'm going to be perfect at it. Well, guess what? You're not going to be perfect at it until you try it. It's actually a self-fulfilling prophecy. And again, it's all this stuff that goes on in your head. So, part of my philosophy in life, and I've used it very much as a manager, is the only bad problem is the problem you don't know about. I mentioned I'm now running a company at the moment. Now, setting up a company that primarily at the moment is supporting research into the mining industry, while the mining industry is winding back, cutting costs, all of these sorts of things, you would have thought I'm absolutely crazy doing it now. The logic I keep telling myself is it's now actually the perfect opportunity. The companies that are going to be resilient, that are going to come out of the other side of this in the best place to be able to deal with the next dip in the commodity cycle, are the ones that are prepared to engage with research. The ones that are prepared to look to others around how they can do things differently. And if they don't know how to do it themselves at the moment, I'm finding a lot of companies in WA in particular that have only grown in the last 5 or 10 years over the mining boom and have never done research. They're terrified of academics and universities, right? Some of them have got CEOs that have never ever been to university themselves. So the thought of going to a university, talking to an academic for help is terrifying to them. But you sit down and you hold their hand and they can finish up changing their businesses. So where do I find the resilience to keep dealing with this? What happens when people don't pay their bills and all of this sort of stuff and I've got to deal with that risk? It's what goes on in my head that keeps us going. And when I step back, the company is actually doing very, very well for a company that's only a few months old in the current environment it is. It's very, very frustrating, and I want things done yesterday, and I'm so used to being a managing director or a CEO myself and being able to make a decision and make it happen. But I've got to control all of that in my head so that my company can be successful. Right? To keep looking at things, it's not a question around whether the glass is half full or half empty. It's a matter of change the question, change the glass. It's now going to be full. We're actually going to do something about it. We're going to make things happen. So hopefully there's some lessons in there that are useful for you. I have a new kitten. I had to put a cat picture up there somewhere or other. Mind you, that's not my cat, but take the time to understand who you're talking to, but take even more time to understand the conversations you're having with yourselves, because they're actually the most important ones. So thank you.